Okay, for people joining the live stream, we are working on database connectivity for version 12 of Wolfram Language. And actually, I realize we're writing a page about relational databases, but basically every function on here applies to entity classes in general, does it not? Except for the stuff about SQL things. So all of this stuff down here really is part of the general knowledge management stuff. Is that not correct? Anybody comment on that?
I think so.
Right, so it's part of this. Tony, would you like to comment on this here?
Yes, so those functions should work properly with any backend.
So really, we should have, those functions should also be on this page.
Maybe with a different viewpoint, like we have here on the relational database page, the more relational view of the things.
So where would you put them on this page?
Around entity class. Because the implicitly defined entity class were the first constructs with which we could do some queries in the entity language.
Okay, but then we've got all kinds of things like entity properties here. Maybe we need some.
I think that a nice way to divide things up is basically things that can go in the first argument of entity value or in entity list, and things that actually go in the second argument.
Like okay, but here we've got things like custom entity stores. By the way, why isn't entity register on here? What these things here, are these not, why are these futurized?
I guess they should not be futurized. That was probably the first time I edited a guide page that didn't know about the futurization.
Okay. Well, arguably, okay, so those should be unfuturized.
Yes.
Okay, so now here, how would we characterize this? Are the commas here correct? I don't know. Okay, so really what there is something here that we want to add. Something about manipulating computing with entity classes. Is that right? But I feel like this should go lower down on the page. I think it should go here. And I think entity value should come up. No, that's okay. Entity class is implicitly defined by property values, and then computing with entity classes. Is that a reasonable characterization of what we're talking about here?
It's more like the process of constructing those entity classes is different.
Yeah, I think so too. It's not this kind of.
Okay, all right. Constructing complex entity classes. No. Setting up? No. Synthesizing. What's the right term? And fundamentally, it's entity function.
What about defining?
Well, entity class is implicitly defined by property values. Okay. Entity classes.
That is true for this as well. I mean, there is really, I think that the implicitly defined entity classes were really the embryo of all of this.
Okay, but then we need another characterization. Entity classes defined by computations. Is that fair?
Yes.
Not. No, I don't think so.
Okay.
It could be all lookups theoretically.
I see what you're saying. Well, I mean, what about computed entity classes? Setting up computed entity classes. I'm not sure. Okay, let's see what it looks like when we start putting things in here. So,
Stephen, one thing is you can view all these classes as transformed entity classes from the base ones. You know.
yeah, I understand, but how about transformations and computations on entity classes? Okay, let's see what we actually will put in here. Okay, so we would have entity function.
I wouldn't put it in that same group.
Why?
Because it's like all the others are covariant and this is contravariant. So,
What do you mean? What? Okay, the description of entity function is what?
well, the description of entity function is something that is like an entity property, but is computed. So,
right.
It's kind of a multivariate entity property.
what?
You can check various things at once, various properties.
Also, Carla, do you take into account the case maybe in the future where entity function may start returning something like an entity class?
That doesn't change anything. Even entity property can return an entity class.
So you're saying more about the argument of the entity function than the result?
No, the way I see it, what really makes the distinction is where it goes in entity value.
Yeah, okay.
So entity function is something that is for the second argument of entity value. All the entity classes are for the first argument of entity value.
Okay, that's why you mentioned covariant and contravariant. I understand. So you view entity value as a kind of a inner product?
No, it's the adic product, really. So.
Okay, so hold on. So
Okay.
in here, we're saying, so entity function, do we have examples here? Oh, gosh. Right.
I mean, if we don't have the usages approved yet, I wouldn't spend much time
Okay,
on
so then, so arguably, we could put entity function right underneath entity value. Is that a fair statement? Fair thing to do?
I would put it with entity property, really, but
No,
yes.
but it's not going to work on this page, right?
Why not?
Because too high up on the page. It's not that important. It's a kind of obscure thing relative to entity value. It's very obscure.
According to me, in this page, entity value is the most important thing in this page. Because it's the main resolver of everything.
Well, fair enough. Maybe we should
It's
put entity value
definitely
really high
more
up.
important than entity group.
Maybe even entity list and entity value should be grouped separately as resolvers in a separate group from the others.
Okay, so these things here could go slightly lower down. Do you agree with that? Michael, can you comment on that?
Yes,
I
they
agree.
could.
List of entity classes. List entity class list. Where does that go? Does it even work?
Yes. It's one of the few functions, and maybe the only one, that acts on a type. It is in some sense a type property, the list of classes.
I see. So it doesn't belong here. No, of a given type.
It doesn't generate them because there's an explicit list somewhere of the named entity classes. Yes.
Why is that keeping its... All right, so you would claim maybe we should put these up here. Where does dated go? Does dated go in any of these?
It is related to properties.
Do we mention it anywhere here? Oh, we do. Entity type name. All right, so then we've got entity function. So how do we describe this? We say
Effectively, it's a dynamically computed property.
Symbolic representation of a function of a property dynamically computed from a function. No, symbolic representation of a function. Okay, so the important part is that properties with properties as variables. Is that right?
No, it's not true. It's generally entities as variables, and then you extracted them by using basically entity value inside.
I see. Okay, so that's in fact the correct statement.
But in some cases, it might be entity classes as values, as variables. But like
In
when
which
you're
cases?
when you're aggregating.
No, but it's not the classes that are supplied as entities.
Yeah, it's more transposed classes in a sense.
No, but that's the it's classes. If you think about how entity value works.
Yeah, that's
classes.
true.
How about that?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not entirely happy about this because it's like, it's not really that we have entity constructs as variables. It's more that parameters bind to entity constructs. But I guess I'm being pedantic.
Well, why don't we say treating? Except that breaks a line, so we're not allowed to do that. Okay, hold on. Let's look at
Yeah, but I would say parameters rather than variables. Yeah.
Close enough. Okay.
Sounds a bit Russian now.
Okay, we should articulate it, so to speak. Okay, hold on. This flow is not very good. So this is.
I mean, even entity properties is also kind of a resolver.
Okay, I think this is okay. All right, now transformations and computations on entity classes. Okay, so that's where it's basically this group here. Is that correct?
Yes.
I have a feeling that we should just list those in a big line here, unless we want to pick out one of them as being a useful one to mention.
Okay.
Is there only one that you think is particularly strong and useful to mention?
Sorted.
I like filtered and extended more than sorted, but.
What would we say for filtered entity class? Entity class, symbolic representation of an entity class filtered by a criterion.
Rather a predicate, but yeah.
And it should be clear that the predicate is entity function rather than a usual function.
Well, they can look at the documentation to find that out.
Do we support bare entity property as a second argument?
Yes.
Okay.
What should we put? What heading could we put here? Utilities for?
I mean, the first three are kind of uniform.
They give something like with the semantics stripped. That means without the entity or entity property wrapper.
Yes. Well, dated maybe.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. The first three are basically extractors.
Well, so are these. You say geoposition of something.
Ah, in that sense. So you can apply quantity to an entity and you get something?
Some entities, I think, yes. So, for example, I don't know. Michael, do you want to comment on that?
I would guess that a quantity is there because entities return quantity objects.
I think so too.
In that case, that whole line is...
Well, no, but sometimes geoposition is, you can say geoposition of an entity.
Geoposition, yes, but the other two, no, to my knowledge.
Date object, you can do the same thing. If you say, if there's a battle or something, I think, let's try it.
But
I mean,
also,
we could make some work with quantity, say, for physical constant entities, but we currently haven't set it up.
I think we should.
Okay.
actually, for data object, it in general will be ambiguous because entity may have more than one date as a property.
But the same for geoposition. Like
Yes.
a whole country has multiple geopositions.
Yes.
I mean, the choice of averaging it for geoposition would be completely crazy for quantity.
All right, let's not solve this problem right here, okay? So long as what is this? Matching given name pattern. Did we never did that, right?
No.
Although we could. That's in the category.
Not really. Not really. I mean, we could, of course, but doing it efficiently might be challenging.
It's like find all species of snails with names beginning with Q.
Exactly. I mean, yes, we could make it work, and we do it partially on the website because people use it for crossword puzzle, but I'm not sure if that's so critical for the language.
Yes.
In the relational world, we can do it pretty efficiently, on the other hand.
Well, I think we should, well, you could do it efficiently if you ignore linguistics.
Yes.
I mean, if it's just canonical names, it's easy. Right, Michael?
Yeah, but that would be relatively pointless because
Yeah.
common names would be the relevant one.
Well, but could we do it for common names? That would be easy as well, wouldn't it? I mean, it's only when we have to do all linguistics that it gets hard.
Yeah, but sometimes we have more than one. No, we have only one common name. Sorry.
Let's look at doing this. Find entities for common names.
Okay.
It just seems useful. And I mean, I think the way it would work is you just say find entities
Of string pattern.
Yeah, of type, comma, string.
Type, comma, string pattern, yeah.
Stephen, we are getting completely sidetracked. We haven't even started looking at and we have half an hour left.
Okay, all right, okay. Thank you. Okay, let's keep going here. Okay, so then, should we just list every one of these other ones? Just list them on a line here, just to give people an idea of what's going on. And then we're going to say ... And, you know, I have a feeling we may need a separate guide page specifically about these functions that also mentions helper functions that will go along with these. What do you think about that?
What would the helper functions be?
I don't know, some of the functions that you actually use inside merged and aggregated and so on.
Oh, yeah, well, inside, yeah, or Tony, rather. We don't.
Well, yes, you do, because there's some operations like arithmetic operations that work.
That will be probably a matter for entity function, because that on the page of entity function, we can say which constructs can go inside. And all these operations, they only use entity function.
Okay. Should we... Yeah, okay. All right, let's go back over here. Okay, so the page that this was referenced from is a page about databases, right?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure that this page, I think this page may need to be updated because where's the main page for Entity Store? Where is the main guide page that Entity Store is mentioned on? Wow, it hardly gets mentioned. Well, that's irrelevant as well. That talks about only about SQL databases, so that needs to be fixed. Okay. Sorry, who is PMing here?
Andrea.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so this page needs to be updated because okay. Okay, so this one is read-write, is it not?
Database link is read-write, yes.
Stephen, last time we decided to not explicitly write it here because it's obvious from the operations that are listed below.
Okay, fair enough. Relational database, how could we describe this as relational database inspection, relational database okay, that goes to that page there.
You could write, I guess, relational database connection and metadata.
Okay, hold on. So it's entities. You know what? I'm going to change the way this is set up slightly. Complete representation of custom entities and their properties. Okay, so symbolic representation. Okay, so register an entity store so its entities can be used immediately or something. Used transparently.
Used.
What's that?
Directly.
But do we need an adverb there?
Yes, because you can always use it. Okay, so now here what I'm going to do.
Yeah, but I would say that you register an entity store so that entity value works with those entities.
Right.
Well, but I think that's a reasonable way of saying, okay, here.
Because in the end, we never documented that you can use the unregistered entity store in some of these functions.
Is that true?
You could use the entity store, but not kind of, how should I say, not the entities from the store in some sense.
No, yeah, but you can pass the entity store as a parameter
Exactly.
to entity value.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I obviously failed to get my 12.12 plus thing. Oh, there we go. Okay. Yeah. I think this doesn't belong. You know, I think this stuff should move down on the page. And this we're probably going to get rid of, actually. We'll need a guide page about, and Andrea, this is something, we'll need a guide page of all of our entity property stuff, I think.
Okay. So we will have two guide pages. This one.
No. The entity property, I meant, sorry, by that I mean all of the domains that we're dealing with. So this here should be changed to be a pointer to that guide page, okay? Not these functions which we're largely deprecating. Make sense?
So like references?
No, I'm saying there should be a new guide page which points to the new entity type pages.
Okay.
Okay. Also allows custom entity stores to be added that behave. This is all a bit of a mess of custom entity stores that behave, that allow computations just like in.
Whose entities?
What?
It's the entities that behave, not the stores.
I'm not saying behave then. That also allows the addition of custom entity stores that
add user-defined entities to the knowledge base.
also allows custom entity, also supports custom entity stores that allow user-defined entities to be added to allow entities to be added to user not. See, we don't want to say to the. It's not to the central knowledge base.
Correct.
So support custom entities that allow user-defined knowledge bases.
Knowledge base fragments, because I think we typically use knowledge base in the singular as meaning the whole.
Okay. That allow user-defined additions. Been hearing lots of background breathing. Also supports custom entity stores that behave that allow the same computations as the built-in knowledge base. Again, I'm not sure this page is perfect, and I think we may need to refactor this yet again. Okay, so this is called database connectivity, but database...
Still, we have 20 minutes left. We haven't looked at one usage message yet.
Well, we're not going to get through this right now. I mean, I can already tell you that. I told you this was going to take a long time. Right? Okay, look, we've got to go from this page to the messages. Okay, it's not going to do us any good to just jump in and look at one random piece of text.
Okay.
I mean, we can look at this, but I don't think it's going to help very much.
No, it's fine. I mean, the only thing that it's like really time that's really important that we go through now is the entity class thing, because
okay, well, so let's look at that.
Yeah. So the question is whether we should be able to nest entity class just like the others or not.
Okay, so yeah, go ahead.
So my claim is that entity class, especially implicit entity class, can be a very nice shorthand for instead of writing the full entity function when your filter is simple.
By the way, you haven't started editing entity class yet. Is that correct?
I haven't touched it because Tony is of the opinion that this shouldn't change at all.
Okay, so what is the issue?
So right now, entity class is documented to take only a string type as the first argument.
Okay.
And my claim is that
yeah, go ahead.
Since filtered entity class can take anything as the first argument, so should entity class, at the very least the implicit ones, because it's basically a shorthand for the same thing. And so in cases where you basically just have to say, capital is Rome, then you don't want to type the full.
Okay, so if I were to say, let me just try something here. If I were to say sampled entity class of city, oops. Why is that turning red?
I don't know if it's in the build you have yet. So maybe say filtered entity class or something. Yeah.
Okay, so let's say filtered entity class city, and now I'm going to say entity function.
And you can say something like population greater than, I don't know, some millions.
So here I'm got to say C of population greater than 10 to the 7. Is that right?
But I wouldn't evaluate that because...
Why?
Because it will download all the cities. So if you want to try it out, try it with country.
Okay, I assume it does an efficient job of downloading those using the caching infrastructure, right?
Yes.
Okay, so fine. So then I have this. And now what do I want to do? I want to say entity list of this, right? For example. But
it might fail because it needs to be a quantity.
Okay. So can I just say that? Yes. Okay.
Okay, so my claim is that...
By the way, that example should be given. I mean, that's a decent example of, let me just put that on the page about filtered entity class, as well as entity function, actually. Except let's change that to 10 to the 8 people. Okay, that's nice.
Okay,
right.
So now we
go. Hold on. Let's put this on the page. So while I'm thinking about it, let's put that on the page of entity function.
This should probably go in property and relations for entity function.
I think it's a fairly minimal example of entity function. I mean, is there a more minimal one?
Yeah, you can just call entity value with one entity and one entity function.
But why would you do that?
Well, to compute something like, I don't know, the population density, something like that.
Yeah, but you could just compute it directly from the entity. I mean, you could just compute it by extracting those entities and dividing them.
Yeah, but maybe, but I mean, in the future, this is going to be more efficient. It's certainly a lot more efficient on SQL.
Yeah, right. Okay. All right. Now, the question is whether I can take this and make that an entity class. Is that right?
Yeah, I suppose that now you want to say area larger of some million square miles. So instead of, I mean, my point is that this thing that you just wrote could be expressed as an entity class.
Well, this thing here, I don't understand. How would I use entity class?
So, okay, around it, you want to filter another time, for example.
Well, why don't I just use
filter?
Okay,
let me put it this way.
Okay, so I could say this. I could say this without the entity list, right?
Yes.
Say that without the entity list, and then I could say here, I could say area take largest 4.
Yeah. So my point is that in general,
I could say entity list of that.
Yeah.
And that doesn't work.
Yes. Because entity class can only appear with a string as the first argument. But my claim is that implicit entity class is in general shorthand for filtered entity class or for sorted entity class. And so why should it work differently?
Well, I would tend to agree with that. Tony?
Yeah, technically it makes sense, but the only issue is that the name is missing the operation that it's doing. So its name was intended to originally for named entities, and now it is used as a wrapper to filter, and that is not obvious from the name.
But it's used as a wrapper for filtering anyway. It's just that it's the generic wrapper, and it does different things depending on the second argument.
Well, it has this, look, entity class has this shorthand way of doing filtering, which is less powerful than filtered entity class.
Yeah, but it saves a lot of keystrokes.
Right. So I don't see a problem with doing this. I don't see a problem with having that as an alternative, basically, to filtered entity class. It's a minimal alternative to filtered entity class. Now, the other possibility would be to support entity class-like syntax in filtered entity class. Is that crazy?
If we want to do also take largest, yes, because then it's not a filter anymore.
I see.
The same reason why we can support take largest in select.
It is a filter. It's just a non-local one.
It's not a predicate.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, well, I think we should support this. I don't see a reason not to support it.
The only technical way to do it might be basically the brute force one.
Well, that's true also of filtered entity class. Well, the other question is, should we support this also for named entity classes? Like first you filter by population and then you take just the ones in G8. Would that work?
I have no idea. You say comma G8 here?
I think this should not work.
Pretty weird.
I think this should not work.
Yeah, that seems very weird. Okay, so by the way, question on the live stream about entity extend. Yes, that's now extended entity class. What to do with an unregistered entity store? What was the issue with unregistered entity stores?
Like if you build it, you have it not yet unregistered. You are in the process of building it up, and once you're ready, or you read it on a file, then you register it.
Right. But registration is merely a question of whether you can use it directly you can use it indirectly. But by the way, do we have? I mean, we really need some tech notes, workflows, etc., to document all this stuff, because it's really not. This is way too complicated to be able to describe it just in pure guide pages and so on. Okay, so what we've got here. Let's look at a random page here. Let's say sorted entity class. Okay, so listen. We don't tend to use these as adjectival forms. That's not a form we like to use the function name as an adjective, so to speak.
Okay.
I think we just say an entity class.
I mean, the point is also that it's not necessarily an entity class object. It's an entity class-like object.
Okay, well then don't say entity class like that. Represents an entity class sorted by the values of the property prop. Sorted according to the values of the property prop. Soon this cold will go away. Represents an entity class. Yeah, well, this should probably be said better, but okay, I think that's fine. Okay, it's a question about why not automatically register an entity store, because you have to resolve, because you can have multiple entity stores that have the same entity type names in them. And you have to decide which one is going to actually take over. Now, there has to be a moment where you say, this entity type name is going to be the thing that entities of that type with that first argument are going to be resolved in terms of. Is that a fair statement, guys? Tony?
I think that another argument is that when would that happen? At evaluation time? What if you're like manipulating the entity store?
Yeah, but if you have two entity stores which have the same type name, Tony, can you speak to this, please?
Well, they are being shadowed. One is shadowing the other, and there's
no. I know that. But if you register one of them, then it will be the one that gets to grab that type name. You
yes.
See what I'm saying? Whereas, yeah, so that's why you have to explicitly register an entity store. And I wonder whether we say that in register entity store, whether we make that point. Oops, what is it? Entity store, what is it?
Entity register.
Okay, so that they can be used to registers the entities in the entity store so that they can be used directly with entity.
Yeah, so the analogy is that you have a held expression sitting somewhere in a notebook. There's no way to access that programmatically. Same if you have an entity store, unless you register it, you can't access its contents.
Using entity value rather than
correct, yeah.
I have to say that I am not really that happy about entity register and the fact that we have deprecated $entity store. I mean, I think that we should, maybe entity register is nice, but we should keep $entity store up to date with entity register.
We have entity stores open close.
Yeah, but the problem is that, no, what I'm saying is that whenever we are writing tests and stuff like that, it's very useful to block $entity store. But $entity stores is not being updated by entity register. So it's nice to have entity ready.
You and Tony can talk about this, okay? Graph database. Yes, the Sparkle stuff. Somebody's asking, Carl is asking on the live stream whether the Sparkle stuff will be included in 12.0. Yes, absolutely. In the graph store. In the graph store thing. So listen, one thing that I'm commenting on here is, can you please not adjectivalize things like entity store?
Yeah, I can change that. I can change that.
Okay. Okay. All right. So let's go look here in the time that remains. Let's go and look. Okay. So let's call this, what should we call this? Data computation with relational databases, rather than working with something like data, because to make it clear that it's a read-only operation.
But are we gonna just change the name of the guide page when we support writing?
I would think so.
Okay.
I mean, but well, okay. Look, okay, hold on. Here, okay, so here, direct data storage and manipulation. So that's data set. Okay. So that's really the first case there. Entity-based, okay, that's fine. Then this is really relational database operations, but I don't think it's okay. Okay. Connection to an external SQL database. Somebody is suggesting manipulating relational database information. It's interesting, although it suggests a little bit meta information. That makes it somewhat clearer that it's not. Okay, so here, we might want to mention entity class here. Okay, so here, what should we say? SQL database object. I'm not even sure we have to mention on this page. Database inspect. What is the description here? What is database inspect?
So database inspect, okay, takes database connection, returns database SQL database object, basically.
You can say it retrieves the SQL database metadata if you want something more generic.
So why do two of those functions not have the letters SQL in their name, and one has?
Okay, the reason is that database connection is not very specific to SQL, in that it's more like contains things like host, port, etc. And database inspect as well. I mean, in this case, I can imagine a database inspect that takes another MongoDB database connection and return a MongoDB database object.
Okay, yeah.
Wait a minute. So database inspect is supported for MongoDB or not?
No, and MongoDB has not made it into system yet. So
no, I understand.
So I think
By
that
the way, this has its own guide page, doesn't it, Tony?
Yes, 3 guide pages or 4.
Well, okay. Where does it? Where's the top level one that it should link to? We need to put a link in here.
There's one for Sparkle Query and one for Sparkle Update, but there's also a combined one.
Okay, well, so the combined one is what we need to point to here. Okay, so if you can, okay, so could you? Somebody needs to put that link in, right? Unless you want to tell me the name of the page, and I'll put the link in.
It's a Graph Store overview, but it's not in CVS.
Well, then it needs to be there, and that needs to be linked to it. Okay. All right, so here we're going to list, I see. Maybe we don't want to maybe we don't want that there. Okay, so what is the description here? Extract metadata from a database or specific tables. Is that right?
I wouldn't mention tables in case we extend this to databases that don't have tables.
Well, this is in the section on relational databases, so it can talk about tables.
Okay.
It seems like a weird name for what this is doing.
What would you call it?
But what is it returning? I mean, it's returning. What does it return?
Returns an SQL database object.
As opposed to database connection.
It takes a database connection and returns an SQL database object.
Okay, then
I mean,
the SQL database object. How do you then refer to? Okay, tell me how you hook this up again.
Okay, the thing is that SQL database object is actually already its own constructor. So in theory, you could get rid of this function and use SQL database object as the constructor directly.
Okay, but how do you connect that to an entity or an entity class?
You need to then wrap it in entity store and then register that entity store.
Okay.
So SQL database object is a lower level description.
Okay, so we're going to have to put this stuff up at the top here. And we'll have to say, okay, connecting to databases, registering database content or something, right? And then that has to go into, then there has to be an entity register there, right? And then we'll want something like that. Is that correct? Is that correct or not correct?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
So,
all right, we're going to have to wrap right now. We will have to continue.
Okay, just one little thing. I mean, maybe we can speak about it next time, but I guess this is the last call to do this. The SQL database object, I don't really particularly like the name SQL at the beginning. I think it's redundant. The reason why we added, I think, is because we wanted to distinguish between NoSQL and stuff. But I guess, if in the future we're going to have like NoSQL support, we can have NoSQL database object and have this one called just database object, because in the end, databases, at least to me, are relational. It's true that there are also NoSQL databases, but we can have either.
Why can't this work for any database? SQL or NoSQL, doesn't make any difference. It's just got all kinds of detailed information. It just represents a database.
It would have completely different properties, I guess.
So what?
Yes.
And the other problem is also that we are using SQL database object to to dispatch different entity stores to different backends, and that can only be...
Who cares? Then you can look inside the thing.
No, you can't. The app values don't work.
Carlo, my point is that it's best to have this guy to be called database object and have in the future NoSQL database.
Yeah, I understood your point.
That's not going to work. Okay, and you shouldn't have brought this up right after the end of our meeting time. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
So I think this should be called database object, and I think you should plan to have it be able to look inside.
No, but that's not how app values work, Stephen.
You're dispatching on all these functions on this, but that's not how you're going to do it.
No. What I'm saying is that entity store dispatches on that symbol.
Oh, but it can look inside. It just has to have more code to look inside. It's not difficult to look inside. Don't give me that. That's a silly implementation problem. I think this should be called database object. I agree. There. Okay. I think we should rename this to database object and expect to look inside it to see what will actually be done with it. All right, I need to go. I will push these changes and we will follow this up very soon. Okay, I think this is going to take another on the order of 4 hours total to get this documentation done. Okay, but I encourage you to fix that deadjectivalization, and I encourage you to get a default database that get these SQLite databases installed and start making examples. Make sense?
Sure.
Okay, see you guys. Thanks to folks on the live stream, and talk to you all soon. Bye.
Bye.